Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming, and thank you to Louisa for an introduction, lovely introduction, and for hosting this. So I'm going to share my screen and talk you through my work, and then I'm going to have a conversation with Alexandra. So I'm going to share my screen. And play. Okay. Ooh, I always get confused with these little bits at the top. Here we go. Oh, now I can't see anyone. Okay, so I'm going to start with a word. And the word is heart. And I wanted to start with this word because it's the sort of bodily expression of what I want to talk about, which is love. And I'm going to start with a bit of an outline of a body of work that I made called Conversations with My Mother, which is a really important sort of piece of work that is a key to me explaining why I do what I do and how I do what I do. So these are two works from Conversations with My Mother. And the body of work as a whole is a series of small embroidered, perforated, burned photographs of me and my mother. And they were made while a very particular time period when my mother had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. And at the same time, my fertility was unraveling. The work starts with a text, and I'm just going to read a tiny part of that text because it really sort of expresses sort of the key thing for what it was about. It starts, "This is my story of severance. It explores the relationship I had with my mother and my own inability to become one. It is a photographic performance of being cut from the role of daughter, while at the same time denied a maternal role to shape my future." So these are images from the work, and the one on the left here is a photograph that she took of me, and the one on the right is the photograph I took of her. And they have been covered with tissue paper and stitched and very gently burned, and they're extremely fragile. They're about 10 by 12 inches, and they're very fragile, and the surface is crumbling quite a bit now. So I made a very small number of works about this experience. And a few of them, quite a few of them were shown recently in Bristol Museum and Art Gallery as part of Bristol Photography Festival. And they were put here amongst, I made an intervention in the Victorian Gallery, where there's a lot of these kind of, massive, big, blockbuster pre-Raphaelite paintings. And I knew that I couldn't really, there's something about the scale of these works that those are mine, between the Guarded Bower on the left by Arthur Hughes and the Garden Court by Burne-Jones on the right, and my works in the middle. And I couldn't, compete with the sort of scale of the work. It wasn't about that. It was about saying something mighty. And I felt that I had something really big that I wanted to say about maternal love. And so they went in this gallery to make this kind of intervention. These are three of the works that were in the museum, right in the middle of that room. And it felt like a very deliberate act to show these works in that space. And I had my very small stitched works sort of next to these giant paintings. And I was able to visit the museum because it's actually, it's my hometown. And I was able to visit as a member of the public, and I could see mothers and daughters going to see these works. And, it's not unusual for me to have conversations with mostly women about the losses that were resonant with them. And I'm really touched by that reciprocity, that there's a feeling of sharing a story, which I think is really powerful, that the work operates in that way as a provocation for somebody to share a story back. And I realized when I put the work in that room that what I was looking for, that I was making something about a big maternal love story, my own big maternal love story. And that's what I wanted to say in this room. And in sharing that work, what I was exploring, the room, we called it In Conversation. And it was being in dialogue with those works. And I thought a lot at the time when I made them about the roles that I was performing. And in the text, I said, I described them as wife, daughter, sister, artist. I became carer. And critically at that time, I slipped into being childless or child-free. And simultaneously, I became orphan. This is the last photograph from that intervention in the museum. And the work is either side of a painting about love and death. And I really felt like I wanted to make this direct connection to this performance of grief. And the image on the right there is a piece called My Two Blue Heart on Your Two Blue Sleeves. And it's a piece I made around the same time, and I'm wearing my grandmother's dress and I'm falling through space. And it was very much about performing grief and feeling like there was no safety net. And I should say that gilded frame was something that I then, when I knew I was going to show this work in the museum, I gilded it myself, which was a very labor-intensive process and actually ties very much into the things that I do now, which I'm going to come back to with Alexandra. But I wanted to explain how I came to develop all these different methods through this piece of work. This piece of work is so much about holding the thing, holding the photographic image. So this piece is from that little grouping that I showed you at the beginning, and it's called Green Garden Trilogy. And this is the smallest one from that grouping. It's only about 4 by 5 inches, and it's edged with blanket stitch, which is very much a specific reference to the language of cloth. And I wanted to make something that was about being held. And it's a tiny work. My mother is obscured behind those 2 circles in the middle. And I wanted to make something that was about holding her in the landscape. She was absorbed in the landscape, and I was holding the tiny object in my lap, edging it with blanket stitch. And I realized when I was doing it that I was sewing myself to something that was never going to be materialized for me, that it was the maternal line and that I was at the end of it. And so I made this piece, and I kind of couldn't really have described at the beginning exactly what I was doing, but it became so apparent looking back that that is what I was doing, that I was making this thing to hold her. And it sort of was a key sort of discovery that it was the endeavor of making that I wanted to develop, that I was trying to develop. And I was learning how to be an artist in this. I should say both my parents were artists, and I had sort of started making this work. It was so it was so different to what I'd made before. And it was a real kind of unraveling of all these different things, you know, literally pulling the thread and trying to figure out what I was making, what I was thinking through the act of sewing. So I'm showing you this because I then went on to make another thing which referenced cloth, but this time it was for me, and it was called Role Play Woman with Cushion. And it was bigger than what I'd made before. It was lots of small photographs of me stitched together. And you can see the scale of it here. And this was shown a few years ago in London. And it's a sort of quilt. And this is the close-up. So I just wanted to show you this because it's how I started to feel my way towards this embellishment of the surface. And I'd realized I'd sort of discovered this thing that I could do with the needle, that I could use the needle to make this mark on the surface of the photograph. And it became really articulate for me. It became really eloquent. So I started to use it as a way of directly saying something about touch. And it became a way of saying something about feeling and touch and trying to get to something that was inarticulable. You know, I was able to say something about feeling in a way that I couldn't say in a descriptive way. I could just sort of sense my way towards it. And so that was how I kind of developed towards this method that has become so important to my work. So it seems appropriate to move on to my next word, which is hands. I'd gone from this very particular way of working with a particular story that was about being attached to something. And I started to make work which was very much about the sensation of touch, but on the body. And I used my body in the work because I wanted to make it about I wanted it to be about something that I had all the sort of ways of controlling and using this tool, which was the body that I had. And I made something, I started to write on the body with the needle. And I realized that's what I was doing. And it was through this work that I realized that when I was using the needle with the thread, I was attaching myself to something, that was about being attached. And when I used no thread and just the needle, it was about being unattached. And I could see that there was this thing about the body being in space, that I was in space, that I wasn't attached to anything, and that there was no other object, no other thing in the work. It was just me in the work. And I was still kind of very contained. I think you can see I'm still physically contained in the work. And it sort of led into what became constellations and coordinates. And that's a body of work in which there are two parts: the black and white images with just the needle, and there's a color part where I use thread. And it was a sort of unfurling, a kind of a taking of space through this work. And I was sort of making a gesture with the body. I started to use the body, my body, as a way of making a shape, which became indicative of something I wanted you to read. I knew I was making something with the shape that I was making that seemed like it was there to be read. That was what I was trying to do. And I was writing on the body with the needle. I've got a little clip of how it works. So this was when it was shown in Print Sales Gallery in 2019. So I'm just going to play it and you can see how we hung one of them. So it's very much about a three-dimensional. I really hesitate to say object. I struggle, and I know Alexandra and I are going to talk about this, but what I'm talking about is a thing, and it's in space, and it's three-dimensional, and you can walk around it. But I know I'm going to come back to that. and the other part of it was in color. And this was using the thread again as a way of making a mark and saying something that was there to be read. You know, there are symbols on these 3 images that are sort of indicative of a language that I was making. And I sort of realized again that, you know, I was really interested in this idea of being in space and sort of talking about the black hole, you know, that there is an abyss, and that's what I'm very interested in thinking about. And the actual sort of origin of that work, what I began with was the idea, it's called constellations and coordinates. I was thinking about how we map read, how we navigate. And I sort of started with the idea of looking up at the sky, and that was the constellation. And then the coordinates was the idea of dropping anchors to make marks, to sort of find locations that you can sort of put down a coordinate as a way of navigating. And they're all kind of ways of me thinking around how to navigate the feelings that just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And in that middle one in particular, I mean, that's just so much about the black hole for me. You know, it's so much, you know, I can feel like I'm almost touching it. And so that's what this work, you know, was sort of moving towards. And it was the labor of making. And when we show them, we often, well, I think we always put perspex on the back, so there's glass in the front and the back is kept open so you can see it, because it's about the hand and the hand that made something. And I want it to be the photograph that was in the world, and there's the action of the hand on the photograph. And I like knowing that you can see that there is a labor of making, that I'm in the work, that I'm making the work by hand, and that there is a pain to that. There is a, which I'm going to talk about with Alexandra, there is an action and a sort of pain to making that is part of that work. And so although they are very, you know, they don't, you know, they have this kind of trying to avoid saying beauty, but for want of a better word, there's a beauty to looking at them, but there is a violence and a pain in the image making, which I want to be evident. So I'm just going to move to the last word, which is head. And this is the trapeze artist. I'm just going to read the text to this because I think it's sort of really kind of, it's a good way in. The trapeze artist shows no fear. Hup, hup, she says, launching off the platform, leaping to catch the flybar in midair, to give the audience a magnificent performance of flight in the darkness. I think of being in unknown darkness, stitching through the year the world turned upside down. Sleep has been fitful at times. We hope sleep will be restorative, but sometimes it isn't. Where do we go in our dreams? I think in my dream I can fly. Maybe it's not an imagining, but a half remembering, flying or falling, held by a thread I do not see, only feel. There is a sensation of being on a swing. I feel momentum propelling me higher each time until I'm not swinging backwards and forwards anymore, only flying upwards and onwards. My sense of the rope evaporates. Untethered, I soar through the air. Instead of gravity pulling me back, I'm suspended above trees, above water, looking down. I see no flybar, but I am flying. I use my thread to mark, stitch by stitch, making my own swing sewn to the sky. In my dream, I felt the edge of the universe, and I knew it was beautiful. I wanted to make something that was moving towards almost being resistant to describing, you know, that I'm trying to explain or articulate. I'm not trying to explain anything. I'm trying to articulate a sense of something that is inexplicable, that there is a feeling and a sensation that is beyond the body. And I started with the idea of head because I started with thinking around how we navigate in multiple ways, that there are many senses and many ways in which we interpret what's going on around us in order to navigate. And the head, I was starting to think about the imagination, that actually I was thinking about being beyond the body and what are the ways in which I could get towards that feeling, a feeling that was being enacted on the body. And I didn't know whether or not that originated from the body itself, or whether or not that was a feeling that was enacted upon the body in the reverse direction. And it's this feeling of, how do you get to a feeling where you describe a black hole of loss or longing or love or yearning, and that there's no way to describe these things. And that's kind of what I'm always looking towards, is how do I reach towards something that is inexplicable? And that's what I was trying to do with this work. So the Trapeze Artist was much more about the sensation of being in the air and weightlessness. And that's kind of why it's so much about being in the air. And I'm going to sort of trail off here and bring Alexandra in so that we can have a conversation more about some of the ways in which we converge and diverge in our thinking. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can bring her in.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jessa. I mean, I think maybe perhaps a good place to kind of start, obviously we've kind of worked through different parts of the body in a way and kind of come to the head. But I think there's something in terms of, we've been speaking a lot about the feet, and there's something about, you speak about kind of groundlessness and kind of defying gravity. And when we spoke last week, I was really interested. We kind of had these kind of different thoughts on that. Like from my kind of dance background, I spoke about the idea of gravity as being grounded is very comforting to me. I found this sense of being grounded very important. But there was something in your work, and especially in the kind of trapeze artist, of, although despite the signs in the work of kind of gravity at work, like the physical signs, there's something about you being kind of, you are in flight, the image is defying gravity, but so are you. And I guess I wondered if you could talk a bit more about this sense of finding comfort in that sense of being kind of in kind of flight, kind of defying gravity, being the body is the kind of central kind of anchor to the image, I suppose.
I think I've got more comfortable with being, I want to say bolder, but I don't know if it's that. It's just, that's a sort of easy word to latch onto. But like early on in the presentation, I showed my 2 blue heart in your 2 blue sleeves, and it's just, again, it looks like I'm falling, and that's about falling without a safety net. That's about being that's about falling. And I think a lot about the idea of the body being in space. Is it falling or flying? Because when you freeze that moment, unless you know the intention, it could be either. Right. And so in the first image, my 2 blue heart, I'm definitely falling. But by the trapeze artist, it's about flying, and it's about, again, with the work that is where the thread is evident, it's about being held. There's a rope. It's like the idea of the pendulum, they're called pendulums, and it's like the swing, and that's feeling of them being in a dream where you get to the top and you feel like you're going to fall. It's that delicious terror of the sensation, and you don't know whether you're going to carry on flying or you're going to fall. And I find that a really interesting place to be. There's a tension there, but it's certainly about, the dragonflies ones, which are from the back, it's a sort of like an interior, and there's an unfurling. It's a literal unfurling of the body and being in the air. I wanted to explain something about how, I suppose, I feel really aware of what I'm doing, and in that awareness I can be free. I mean, it's like I'm getting away from the idea of having to explain anything. I think there's enough. I know the groundwork is there. I know the scaffold is there. I know what the reference points are, and I don't need to explain them. So I'm quite confident with the being in the air, and that being enough. So knowledge, it's like a tactile knowledge.
And I think that's so interesting. I mean, firstly, delicious terror. I love that. And there's also that thing about being enough. And I think that's so interesting in terms of, I think, and I think this will come in through our conversation when we were talking earlier in the week about process, for example, and obviously process is a huge part of your work. But there was something about kind of showing too much or being too much, or this idea of something being enough. And I guess, for you, I find it interesting that, you've kind of got to this phase in the work where this kind of defying gravity, this being weightless, this being kind of in kind of space is, things are suspended. Everything's kind of there's a suspension, I guess, but there's a kind of security in that, it's like, it's kind of, it's not a kind of scary place. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It's not something to be feared. It's actually kind of, kind of something familiar in it as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, well, when you're performing, that thing about performance, there's that thing about knowing when to hold back, and you don't have to say everything for it to have that meaning, and there's the encounter, and that is the encounter is part of the work. The encounter is then becomes the work on the wall is the provocation for the encounter, and the encounter then creates the relationship between the thing. That's the work. It's like a sort of integral part of it, I feel. And so, when you go and see something and you see like a death-defying act, in the circus or whatever, it's like, it's the terror of seeing something and the anticipation that creates the tension that is the exciting part, because otherwise it's a rehearsal with people who are very competent at doing what they're doing, and you hope are not going to die doing it because they know what they're doing. So there's the audience brings the thing, brings the work to life. So I sort of feel like in that confidence of withholding something, that is okay. That's part of the work. That's knowing when to stop.
I think that's so important, and we talk a lot about artists, and it's knowing when to stop is the tricky one. But about leaving space for an audience, that you need to leave something. If you kind of give everything, then it's kind of, you can almost kind of I guess kind of suffocate people in a way, because it's like, okay, I get it, everything's worked out for me, and that's kind of it. But I think it was interesting you spoke of the encounter, and I guess in relation to your work in terms of the different kind of elements of kind of encounter or performance that are kind of taking place. So we kind of have, I guess, the performance in terms of you are performing in the image and for the kind of camera. And then there's also the performance of kind of the post kind of performance where you're kind of laboring onto the images, whether that's through the kind of perforation or the stitch. And then there's also this kind of additional, and you refer to it as an encounter, but I guess it's kind of, there is a kind of element of performance in it as well, where the audience kind of comes in as well, and they kind of activate that in some way. So there's kind of these three layers of kind of performance that the kind of third one I hadn't really thought about until just now. But I wondered, if you could talk maybe a bit about the encounter firstly, and then we can kind of touch on, the other two elements in terms of, especially about the labor of the work.
I think the encounter is the bit that I think about so much, in the sense that I suppose, and to go back to the conversations with my mother, I suppose because I started with that and the encounter was so meaningful. And because when I first shared that work, I took that work when I just made it to a portfolio review, and I was in an altered state. That's the only way I can describe it. And it was very, very surreal. The whole thing was extremely strange. And yet, as I then navigated my way through having that work in the world, it became apparent how much it would touch somebody else and they would tell their story. And I realized how that is so much part of that work, that I have seen it, and that ultimately, I'm not going to be around forever shepherding the work. That it goes off on its own and it will have the encounter. And sometimes someone will come into me and they say they've encountered it and they tell me what it meant. And so I know it worked. I know it does its thing on its own. And that is so meaningful, because then it's like, it's doing what it's meant to do. It's there to make something meaningful for somebody else, something that started with something so personal. So from that, I learned how it operated in the world, how things could be in the world separate from me, even if I had made them. And then I started to, I really conscious of theatre. I went, I started out, I trained as an actor, and I used to work as a dresser. And it's really apparent when you're backstage, whether it's a Tuesday matinee or a Saturday night, you can tell it feels different. And so the audience makes such a huge difference to how the actors feel, what they're doing. It's like there's an alchemy, and it's like that. Then the alchemy is special. So why wouldn't we expect it in an encounter with a work on the wall? We have like this, it's the work on the wall, and somebody walks in front of it. That's a stage right there, a stage for one. And somebody walks in front of it, and they bring their body. They have a body, and we don't also really talk about that, but somebody brings their body to that work. And in that encounter with the thing on the wall or the thing in the space, they are a body in relation to. So I think about that all the time, because then that reading becomes so multi-layered, and you can't control that, and I wouldn't want to. So I think about the encounters like the really magical thing that will be unique to every person that encounters it, because they are unique.
Yeah, and I guess with that, that activation as well. So it's kind of like, and I really kind of like the way you talk about the work is, you're making it, but then when it's out there in the world, it's not just about you. It moves, and it kind of it has this ability to kind of affect and kind of reach other people. And you spoke about with Bristol, you would go and see the work, and you had conversations with people, and it wasn't, I'm sure, just about the work, but it was about their stories, and it was about this kind of their experiences. So how that kind of then, and the sense of like storytelling, I think, is so interesting, in how the work is not just about you. The work opens up a space for something else, something kind of, of course, you're in the work, you make the work, you're so much a part of it, but it's also something bigger than that as well. It's,
I think so.
Yeah. And
I mean, that's why we hope to make it, it's not meant to be under your bed, is it? It's meant to go out and live beyond you, even if it originated with you.
Yeah, and I think there's something, when you were showing the print that was installed in the photographer's gallery, and I was just imagining, obviously I'm seeing the video and it's kind of showing me kind of around it, but I was imagining being in that space and kind of walking around the print, and this kind of bodily experience of, kind of circling and kind of looking, and kind of, I guess, using my body to kind of investigate what was happening, and the kind of intricacies of the work that obviously in the video I couldn't quite see, but I kind of desired to see. I was kind of like, oh, I want to, I want to kind of be and close to it, and
that is a performance. And actually, I've got a little clip. I'm just going to share my screen again, just so that I can show people, because there's the thing about the holes in the photograph. What's really important is there's a performance when you hold it up to the light, you can reveal and so it's like a subtlety with no light, or it's quite dramatic with light. And I'm just going to show people, if I share my screen again, and I'll just scroll to the end so I can just show you. Share. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So I'm just going to show, this is just a little video my friend made at Photo London.
Oh, wow.
So there, you can see it being held up to the light. And so it's this kind of very dramatic reveal that is a performance. I mean, if I just slide, it's really striking how it sort of goes from nothing. Ta-da!
Even that kind of, even that kind of gesture of the kind of taking it off, and the kind of reveal. There's something about and I guess this comes in a lot in your work as well, Jessa, but the kind of the absence and the presence. So there's kind of this constant interplay, I think, both from you, but also from the audience as well. So there's the kind of presence in terms of your body, and the presence in terms of the kind of physical kind of interaction with the material. But then there's also always inevitably going to be the trace. So there's always going to be this kind of, I guess, a kind of alluding to what has been, and an absence. And then I guess with the audience, there's something about, kind of being you're there with the work, and then something about like absence, and then just showing the kind of, when you're showing the print at Photo London in front of the window, and that kind of light coming in and going, it's kind of, this constant kind of conversation between the two, which I find really interesting. I think how you kind of position the work as well, and how you talk about, you talked about navigation and kind of stitching, and how the kind of stitch and the perforation have this different language. They mean, you know, they're kind of, they operate in a different way.
I think so. And I think there's something, it's something, again, that sort of, you know, it emerged out of, you know, you start with something and you think, I'm not quite sure why I'm doing this, but I know it's really urgent and I've got to do it. And that's where it starts from. And then it sort of becomes really evident that I'm saying something completely different with these two different things. And then it's like you've got two vocabularies and wow, double palette. You know, it really is like that. And then the language of the needle, you know, it has such a different language to a photograph. And it's like, there's so many, it's like literally having so many words at my disposal, but they're more, you know, it's bigger than that, because I'm not trapped by the word. But I love language, and I love sort of being able to play with it. But, you know, many languages, it just makes it broader. So, you know, and the language of stitch comes with all, you know, how you do a knot, how you know, it's all those things. But the absence of the thread becomes so eloquent, because it's like you're not repairing, you're making a hole. I'm making a hole, I'm actually damaging it, I'm taking something, I'm adding and taking away, you know, dirt. And I sort of think of it, is it like a taking away to make the mark, because it has that sort of language of removal, but I'm making without repair. And it's you know, I should say it's quite a violent act. You can hear there's a, when I make it, you know, you can hear the sound of the needle, and it punctures the paper, and it's that sound, and it's very satisfying. And I'm making something really, really large at the moment, and you can't lift it to look at, you can't do it. What I can do with the small works is I can kind of turn them and look, and it's really exciting. And I can't, because it's so big, it would damage the paper. And so it's really frustrating, because I'm working completely in negative. I'm working in total blank piece of paper, effectively, drawing completely invisibly, which is weird in and of itself. That is weird. But it's and I can't do the satisfying, but then when I do a big turn and I see it, it's this amazing reveal.
And again, it's like it kind of comes into being. It's like, you can't kind of track the progress of it, but it's kind of, I guess there's an amount of trust that's required there as well, Jessa, because you kind of have to trust yourself that you're like, oh, am I doing this? Is this going right? Is this, because you can't see it in that sense. So I guess there's an amount of kind of, you have to kind of know, no, this is fine, I've got this. I suppose I've practiced so much now that I know what I'm doing, but there's a jeopardy, and there's a, you know, it's a performance you know, everything is a performance in some shape or form. And it's the labor intensiveness of making that becomes part of the endeavor. And I think that's it. And I guess, I know I'm conscious of time and questions and things. I'm sure we could go on forever, but I think that's a really important kind of thing to come to in terms of the labor, because, you know, we spoke of the idea of the activation of the audience, the endeavor. But then there's also, you're in the work, Jessa, but you make the work. And I don't know if anyone follows Jessa on Instagram. If not, you should. And her blog, it's great. But there's a sense of like the process is, you know, it kind of is the work as well, like it, and there's something about kind of you being in the work, you making the work, you know. And we've spoke about you having to prepare yourself to make the work, having to switch your phone on, having to get yourself into a space, because it's so intimate and kind of laborious, and, you know, often kind of painful as well in terms of kind of emotionally and you know, the physical element as well. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the kind of performance of the making, I guess.
Yeah, I've got a tiny little clip that I'm going to share. I can share my screen again just to show you, like, so everything it's me in the work, and then it's the labor of me enacting the mark on the work. So I have actually got a tiny little clip, so hopefully this will be really easy to share, and I can show you again. If I just share this one. Oh, whoops, not that one. You can see there that that's me making a very large piece of work, and just, you know, doing that over and over and over again for hours. Well, you can see I'm sort of stretching my back and arching my back and flattening it, and, you know, and that is a physical, it's an endurance test.
Without... So you have, it's like it's, you know, we're talking about the language of theatre, right? So we talk about this, you know, actors and the kind of being on stage and off stage in the audience, but there's something about the kind of rehearsal and the preparation and the warming up and the kind of, you know, psyching yourself up to do something like you were, you know, like you are to go and do a performance. It's like, right, I have to make sure that I'm kind of in the place, kind of mentally, physically, you know, to kind of go on this journey, I guess.
I've become much more as I've gone on, you know, it's like I sort of, like anything, you evolve your method, and I've become much more conscious of the toll it will take on my body and the physical things I need to do to prepare for that body. And I treat it as a performance. So I run like every day. I make sure I look after myself. I do exercises for my back. I before the pandemic, I do quite a bit of weightlifting just to keep my shoulders, to prepare, because otherwise you're just scrunched over all the time. And it's like, I want to be able to be upright and be able to make work when I'm 80, you know. And there's a seriousness with that. It's a physical pursuit, and a recognition of the toll that takes on me as a person, as an artist making the work, that I have to do it if I have to do it every day, I have to look after myself in order to do that. So it's like anything, you train for anything.
Exactly.
And then the work that I'm making now, which you saw a tiny clip of, that's very physical, and it's like required being really particular about the shape and the shapes that I needed to make to say what I had to say, because it's a manual, and it's an instruction manual for people to learn something. And so therefore the attention to detail and the shape of the body needed serious thought and consideration. So I had to prepare, I had to think about being in the work, and then I think about how to be able to make the mark on the work, that is a performance, even if it's a performance for one, in the sense that I make it on my own, it's intended to be seen, and then it's a performance for others. So the audience just comes later, but then it's the stage.
No, absolutely. And I think this idea of kind of preparing and training, and, you know, especially with dance, they always talk about dancers, you know, you kind of have a lifespan of until you're kind of in your kind of mid to late, it's really bad, but to your late 30s basically, because it's like, well, you know, your body loses its kind of, you know, its kind of ability in lots of ways, you know, and not that I'm not saying that's right, but there's this sense of, like with athletes as well, you kind of get to a point, and, you know, a lot of professional athletes will, you know, retire, and, you know, because there's so much physical endurance on the body. And also you hear of athletes who have to kind of, you know, they have daily kind of massages, and they do certain training, and they eat certain things. So it's about, preparing your body for a certain kind of action. And I guess, with, I think with your work, which I think, you know, perhaps a lot of people won't kind of realize, is, that kind of physical kind of labor that's required in terms of, it's very intense. You know, you're having to kind of switch your phone off, and like, I see you leave little like post-it reminders around your around your studio to remind yourself to eat, or to kind of to take care of yourself, basically, to bring attention to the kind of the act of what you're doing.
I have a note above my door. It says, "Tired? Stop. Have some food. Careful of the table edge," because that's when I'm going to make a mistake. And you know, it's very expensive to make a mistake when you've spent that long making something, and it would be really upsetting. But it's a really fully rounded thought process, and I want to be able to do it for a really long time, because I've got things to say. I mean, that's the thing, I've got a lot I want to say, and I'm saying it with my body. So
yeah.
you know, it's like, and then of course that brings in all sorts of things about how that's going to change, because you know what does that mean? And I don't know what it means yet, but I'll find out. Okay. And I saw someone ask, actually, I'm gonna, please do.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm conscious of time, so we have got one question in the chat, so maybe I'm going to read it out for the purposes of, this has been recorded, so just for the closed captioning, but I know you're going to read it as well, Jessa. So there's a question: do you stitch onto photographic paper, or do you print onto fabric and then stitch?
Yeah, I stitch just straight onto photographic paper, and it's really important to me that is the case, because I want the referent of the photograph. And it's because, again, they have these two languages. The language of fabric, which I'm using with the stitch and the needle, has one meaning, but the photograph so much relates to the thing that was in the world, you know, that we have this association with the photograph, even though I'm not using it as proof of anything, but it has this relationship to being in the world. And I really like the language of photography. So for me, it has to be on the paper. And then there's the sound, you know, when you make it, it is this violence of stitching something. And it came out of, you know, I was stitching picked photographs of my mother, and there's you know, as soon as you sew into a photograph of a person, then there is it brings up all sorts of things about why you were doing that, and damaging the paper of the, you know, which, you know, it's becomes this beautiful thing, and that you have hurt it. And it's and you can't do that on fabric, because it just has a different meaning. It doesn't have the sound, it brings a different language. So yeah, I started for that reason with the photograph, and then it just became a really articulate tool, and a really nice way of saying something about that beautiful violence.
And I think, yeah, there's something, and please do, if there's any more questions, just pop them in the chat, or if you want to unmute and do it that way, that's cool as well. Otherwise I'll keep talking. But I think there's something about saying brave act stitching on paper.
Yeah, it gets, I mean, I don't want to say, you know, it's that conundrum of I sort of don't want to get my words sort of taken out of context, because, you know, violence isn't beautiful, but it's like the tension of those two things, and that it rips if you overdo it. Like if I unpick something, it can tear, and then it gets to a point where it can't be repaired, and that is heartbreaking. That is actually heartbreaking. I don't do it so much anymore, but, you know, in the early days, you know, there were quite a few damaged photographs that, yeah, really upset me. So there's a
great. So just for the purposes of the closed caption, I'll just read the question in the chat. Can you say something about where your practice is heading, how you might continue building on the language you are creating through stitching, and how your work might continue to expand and intersect with other disciplines?
Okay. So my practice is, there's a physical expansion, because I wanted to make something. I'm making something really big, and it's even more performative, because it's this I'm working on a fencing manual for women, and it's about the kind of I mean, it's hugely, that the intersection is so, you know, I'm so interested. I mean, I'm drawing, that's what I'm doing with the needle, I'm drawing, and it's a performance of making, and it's definitely a performance when you see it. And it's about an expanding, there's something about wanting to make something that really takes space. There's a politics of that. There's a politics of taking space and claiming space that I feel is very important. That, you know, that when I make something that is this size, and I'm sitting there sewing, it brings with it some things that I can sort of reject if I make it a much bigger scale. There's a politics to making that sort of work at a very large scale with a needle. So I feel like there's an urgency to do this piece of work that I am now in the middle of, that is really interesting, working at scale. So yeah, I think it's scale to articulate something else, and it's much more performative. It's intersecting even more with performance, I think. Yeah.
I think that's interesting in terms of the body as well, because kind of working on this scale and sewing, it's I guess as a containment in a way, it's kind of gesturally quite kind of contained in a sense, but when you start working on a bigger scale, it becomes more encompassing, I guess, in terms of the body. Like there's a form of, I guess, I hate to say it, kind of a dance going on with the image, where you're kind of navigating the kind of surface and you're moving around it and kind of underneath, and it's not just about the hands in this space, it's actually about kind of taking up this space, and using the body in kind of different ways, like, the bending and the kneeling, and, it's kind of beyond just this, and it becomes kind of out here.
Somebody asked if I was a really great question I just want to answer about video, and I'm just going to read it out as again. It says somebody has said, sounds like there might be video work in the future, as the act of making is so part of the work. And I sort of feel like I actually really want to do something live that is essentially part of making this visible, and the act of making in front of an audience is something I've thought of many times. But we were talking about this last week, Alexandra. There's logistics that start to come in there about how you can make that sort of work when you don't have like necessarily the resources to do it, because again, the labor of doing that, the physicality of doing, like, you can't do it in a cold room. You just can't do that for like 5 hours in a room that's not warm enough, because it would be really difficult, it'd be painful, and it would just be too uncomfortable. And so you start to suddenly need to bring in other people in order to make something in that space. And video, I make videos, which I know some of you see on Instagram, of me doing things, and I often show sort of little kind of clips in process. But I think I'm interested. I suppose it gets interesting. I think I'm thinking more about the role of the audience as actually present, because everything at the moment I get essentially in private, and then the audience comes in after. And I suppose I'm interested in what happens if I do it live.
Yeah, I guess there's also something, a set of conditions with like a live performance as well, where you're kind of, I guess with a video, it's not kind of guaranteed that an audience is going to stay with the kind of work. I guess it's a documentation. Whereas the live work becomes kind of, there's something about that liveness of kind of, same as when you go and see a play or a dance, it's like that space in between where something can, in a horrible way, something can go wrong.
Jeopardy.
Or there's jeopardy, exactly. It's kind of like this kind of chaos of like the excitement of, okay, the liveness of the thing, which I think, I think especially with your work, Jessa, would like translate very well. But like you say, once you start working in that domain, it requires a lot of thinking in terms of kind of like health and safety and kind of institutional financial support in terms of being able to kind of produce something like that, and ensuring you're kind of not in a freezing cold room.
It's just really practical things. But then before the work, again, the work becomes the encounter.
Yes,
or making the encounter the work. I suppose, I mean, that's what I'm really interested in, I suppose. And it's like, I'm making the thing, but it is for the encounter, however that happens. Somebody's asked another question, which I really like, and I'm going to read out.
Cool. And then we've got a hand as well after that.
I've got a hand. So I'm just going to read this out. Have you ever considered performing your Hysterical Woman dance piece, Tribute to Augustine, which you exhibited as a series of photographs at the Bristol Museum? So just to quickly, for people who didn't see it, I made a body of work about 10 years ago, which is called, the full title is The Rehearsal, dedicated to Augustine, and it's pictures that are referencing the Salpêtrière Asylum archive. And I made a series of studies, which are me in a red dress. And then there's a carousel, which is the red dress going round and round. And some of them are really like seductive, and some of them are absolutely terrifying. And it's this sort of interplay of these two things. Oh, thank you. Someone's saying I love this piece. Thank you. I do you know, I really don't know if I would ever do that live. I think the carousel, which is like intended to be small, is enough. And I think I don't know if I would do that live. I think maybe I would feel too much like I was acting it. I think there's a difference between we've talked about performance, and I don't think I'm acting it. I mean, I use the language of acting, but I don't think I'm, you know, we're getting into semantics, but it's really big, isn't it? And so I think I love the performance and the sound of the carousel. You know, it's like, for me, it's like, oh, I love sound. So the sound of the carousel as it clicks.
I guess it's about what is lost and what is gained. I think whenever we think about translating something for a live context, it's about what does it, you know, does it kind of elevate or, you know, offer something different to the work, or actually is the intent, does the intention need to stay with the, you know, the kind of, that kind of the carousel and the clicking and all those things that come with it being kind of, I guess.
Yeah.
The work.
Great question though, because it made me think. Thank you. And it's been such an interesting conversation, because it's made me rethink a lot of things that, you know, maybe I'd gone off in a different direction. So, and somebody put their hand up. I'd love to
is that Ben?
give that person a chance to speak. Was it Ben?
You there? I think it says Ben has raised their hand. I don't know.
Do you want to speak, somebody?
Do you want to put something in the chat? Did you mean to raise your hand?
Sorry. Hi,
Hello.
I can unmute myself.
That's okay. Hi.
Hi. I just want to say thank you for a wonderful talk. I've really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
I was really touched by your work. And there was one thing that you said at the beginning with the kind of fragile portraits of you and your mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, you said that you took the photo of her and that she took the portrait of you. And I was wondering, why was it important for her to take that photo of you?
Oh, wow. What a beautiful question.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So that's a really interesting question. And I didn't spend too much time on conversations with my mother, purely because, you know, the sort of for brevity of the, like, trying to fit in so much in the talk. But that is actually really critical. It was really important to that body of work. And the sort of prequel to it was that we had a disposable camera about a year before, and we had been posting it to each other back and forth. I mean, we were taking really banal photographs. I would take a photograph, put it in the post. She would take a photograph and send it back. And we didn't know what we were photographing. And that is at the beginning of what then became the artist's book of that work. And then in that body of work, she took that photograph of me, and I took that photograph of her. And it was really important because it was a really tender moment. It was about, you know, we'd been washing our hair. And so it was this sort of very gentle exchange. And then in the work, so in the book, which is really the main way I show that work, that photograph, they are on opposite sides of they look at each other. And then that sets up the dynamic for the book, that it's a conversation. So they act as the structure for the fact that it's called Conversations with My Mother. But of course, sometimes when you turn the page of the book and there might only be me or there might only be her, it's because actually the conversation, you know, now she's died, it's really only, it's a one way. I mean, it's like it's inaudible. So it becomes a performance again. You know, I was thinking about how do these works talk to each other. So it was important that she took that photograph of me now when I look at them, because they become the structure for how I talk about the work. And at the time, they were a sort of beautiful exchange. Thank you for giving me the chance to explain that. That's a really nice way of being able to bring that in, because I couldn't have brought that in at the beginning. Thank you.
Yeah, there's some great questions. I'm conscious that we're kind of at time,
Mm.
but is there any other kind of questions anyone wanted to pop in the chat, or if you wanted to unmute and ask something to Jessa directly?
I can't see anything else in the chat, but
otherwise I'm sure we could talk.
yeah, I'm sure we could
all night. Okay, well, I guess we'll kind of leave it there then. Thank you so much, Jessa, for the generosity with your talk and kind of sharing, some of your kind of work in progress as well towards the end there.
You're welcome, and it was really nice to kind of be able to see everyone. And
thank you both. It was such a lovely evening, and I think it's actually our final talk of the year, so just such a nice one to end with.
I've really enjoyed it, and it's really been brilliant to talk about it with Alexandra, so that I've actually had sort of a fellow kind of sort of person to talk about this element of performance, which I really, it was really nice to be able to kind of talk about that particular part publicly. I really enjoyed that, so thank you so much for bringing us together, Louisa, and I really loved having this conversation.
Oh no, I'm delighted that it worked out that way. I mean, there are really nice convergences in your practices, and the areas that you diverge can bring you just interesting directions into the conversation, and also in your separate works. But there's some questions coming in. But thank you.
It will be available. Yeah, someone's asked if it will be available. It will
be.
And,
I did have a moment at the start of this about needing to edit a bunch of films, so it will hopefully be available soon on our YouTube channel and on the event page where you likely would have booked this event. But thank you in advance for your patience around that. But yes, so thank you for joining us, and really to you, Jessa, and to Alex for your lovely discussion tonight, to my colleague Anthony Hartley and the rest of the team for the support, and to you all here for your ongoing commitment to the gallery. We're really grateful to continue to be welcomed into your homes and to have the opportunity to share the work that some of the fascinating people we're working with are doing. So anyway, I hope you are all okay, and that we see you at some of our forthcoming events, I guess in 2022 now, and even more hopefully at the gallery. If you are based in London or can commute to London, we are going to maybe be doing some in-person events again soon, but we'll try to maintain online activity as well, because it's a really nice way of connecting people who aren't based locally without having to travel and everything. But anyway, keep an eye on in your inboxes for some other events that are coming, and thanks for spending some time with us this evening.
Thanks
Bye,
so
everyone.
much, everyone.
Alex, Jessa, I'll be in touch over email again, but for the time
Okay,
being,
great.
everyone, thank you.
Yeah. Right, see you soon.